Welcome everybody to the October 2022 evening program of the North Coast chapter of the California Native Plant Society. In case we have new people who wonder what the California Native Plant Society does, it's a membership organization and it's a nonprofit and it's statewide and it has 35 chapters and it brings together science, conservation, education, and horticulture to save native plants.
I don't want you to fuck up my show.
Oh.
We okay, can everybody in Zoom land be sure you're muted? Thank you. Okay. I don't know if we'll ever get the bugs worked out on this, but okay, we're excited that everybody's here. And I'm Carol Ralph, currently president of our club, and we have in this room a bunch of other people who help run our organization. And if you would like to help, there's a sign-up sheet going around, the Yes, I Would Like sheet. Andrea, I wonder, can you screen share for the Zoom land people?
Yeah, I can do that for you.
Thank you. That's Andrea. She's our Zoom master. Okay, so the Yes, I Would Like is multiple choice. If you want to sign up to get emails, you can read it and you can choose what you'd like to do. And Andrea is going to post it for the Zoom people to see on their screen while I do just a tiny bit more talking. Okay, we just need to take a few minutes because we're a plant organization to ask, has anybody seen any fun plants recently? Barbara.
It's not really, it's a fungus, but I saw a beefsteak polypore. And it was some lantern dudes.
Great. Let's see, somebody from our field trip a couple weeks ago. Joanne? Joanne's remembering the Huckleberry Oak that we saw up on Horse Mountain on our field trip. Yeah. And yes. Which owl clover? Siskiyou owl clover. Good. So the seed pod is important to notice too. And where do you see this Siskiyou owl clover? On the trail to Deadfall Lake. You've been to some nice country. Yes, thank you for bringing a report from there. Okay. I think we'll move right along. I don't see anything in the chat to report. The most important announcement is that if you missed our plant sale the weekend before last, it's not too late because we're having a post-sale sale with special prices like 20%, 40% off. And you just need to go to our nursery at Freshwater Farms on Wednesday, Friday, or Sunday between 10 and 1, or on Saturday between 10 and 3. For the month of October only, we're going to be open all those hours and have these special prices. Okay, and our next field trip is on Sunday, November 6th. And we'll be going to on a combination of trails to walk 2 miles uphill in Prairie Creek Redwood State Park. So beautiful forest. And we're going to walk up to see the techniques that they call lop and scatter that they use when they thin the forest to hurry up the process of getting to old growth characteristics. Leonel told us about it last winter. So now I thought we could go see it. Okay. Then I'll introduce Donna Wilder, our program chair, who will introduce our speakers.
Thanks, Carol. We are fortunate tonight to have Michael Kauffman and Justin Garwood
co-editors of the book that a lot of you have been enjoying looking at and maybe purchasing out in the hallway. And they're going to tell us about their adventures with this book. Michael Kaufman is an educator, author, publisher, and ecologist. He was our program chair for the chapter for several years. And he started a backcountry press in 2012, and currently they have something like 12 books published and more to come. Justin Garwood is a fisheries biologist, environmental scientist for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And he has a focus on fisheries, herpetology, and the mountain lakes of Northern California. So combining their backgrounds and interests and skills, they co-edited this book, The Klamath Mountains. And I'll turn it over to Justin and Michael.
This is first time I came and presented to this group was like 7 years ago, and I was talking about glaciers and plants. And there are two things I am not an expert in, but I was talking and I was terrified because the room was probably more packed than this, but it was packed. And I wasn't in my comfort zone. I'm in my comfort zone talking about aquatic species, namely the ones that move, the animals. So I'm still out of my element, but I'm a little more comfortable because of this project has been a really long-term commitment with so many people. And I really feel lucky to have been part of it. I think Michael can say that as well. It was just this perfect scenario that came together. And what I'm going to do tonight is this is Michael's night. I'm going to introduce the book just briefly to get a flavor of kind of the directions we went. But also relating those biotic, abiotic, and cultural factors that also influence plant communities and everything else. So I'm just going to give little snippets. It's very short. I really want this night to be Michael's celebration of plant communities and the unique plants that make the Klamath Mountains special. So I guess I should start the show here. It's just not forwarding.
Oh, we're not even screen sharing. I guess a screen share, everything got shut down, I guess. All right. It was all set up, I swear. Something happened. Why are there 3 PowerPoints? What is the heck is going on here? Oh, see, this is what you happen when you get everything set up a half an hour, 45 minutes ahead of time, I think. All right, let's see. Back to Zoom. Okay. All right, I'll try it.
Go. So what's natural history? Well, as defined by the Natural History Institute, natural history is the practice of intentional, focused attentiveness and receptivity to the more than human world, guided by honesty and accuracy. Paying attention, right? Why do we flock to natural history? Well, natural history is as old as humanity, and people have never been without this relationship, or they may not have lived very long without it as well. We are intricately tied to our surroundings. But as our culture moves deeper into our relationship with modern technologies and further from our direct relationship to the natural world, natural history has been marginalized in many cases. we hope this turns the tide. At least this book is our small contribution to that, getting people excited about place-based learning and just understanding the landscape around you. I think that this book is unique in a couple ways. I think that, well, for one, Native voices are throughout the book. That's very important because we have a deep history of Native peoples regionally. The second thing is a lot of natural histories are written by one or two authors, and that gives you a more narrow view of things. This book has 34 authors involved, besides Michael and I, who co-edited it, and it's a very humbling experience to work with that many people. And I'm very proud of this project because of that. It just creates a lot of humility that everybody that's involved, every chapter that was worked on is by a subject matter expert, and they took it to the level that people that may not be experts can take it. So I'm really proud of that aspect of it, having as many people involved as possible. Natural history is defined by definable landscapes. The Klamath Mountains are defined by the geological evolution that has occurred here. It's a fascinating place geologically, but it's also very remote and rugged. And within that, within the Klamath Mountains, there's many sub-ranges, and some are even named locally by local people. But in general, it's the geological boundary of the Klamath Mountains. The rock that is there is older than the rock surrounding it. So it is a very old landscape surrounded by a much younger landscape, making it very unique.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so Zoom
The
land's not
Zoom
seeing-
Zoom slides are not advancing. We're not seeing the slides in Zoom world.
With the laptop, anyway.
We'll pause for 1 second.
Yeah, let's shut that down. Yeah, we don't need to be streaming 4 computers or whatever. So you're not seeing, you can't see the slides?
No, we can just see like the beginning of the slideshow with the main page and the history on the side.
So you see PowerPoint before
I
you
see the
start the
PowerPoint.
presentation.
Yeah. But it's not in presentation mode.
There's one spot. I managed to send one.
There it is.
All right, how's that?
Yep. Nope.
That's good? Okay.
No, it's back to
All right. I mean, I don't really know what to do at this point.
you had it for a second.
Oh, it does, you know what? It doesn't like presenter mode, I guess. So
There it
this
is.
works. Well, I guess we don't get to see any of our notes.
I don't do it.
Okay, all right. Okay.
Welcome back, everybody. So, Michael found a cool quote from somebody from the town of Mount Shasta by the name of Bubba Seuss. And Bubba says, so overlooked are some of these mountain areas that they have escaped appellation and remain anonymous in the truest sense of the word. And a lot of this I'm talking about being remote. You know, you look at how many wilderness areas are within this Klamath Mountain range, all the green, and you look at how few of major roads are throughout this area. It's just a really remote, rugged place. You know, it's just ridge after ridge after ridge, and it just simulates maybe why this place has not had a natural history written before, besides the fact that it's a biodiversity hotspot. So you can't really start talking about the Klamath Mountains until you mention geology. Geology here is very complex and celebrated around the world. This is a very simplified map of the geology. And I say, when you read the geology chapter, make a bowl of popcorn, because it's an adventure, and you're gonna read it, and it's gonna just, wow, it's gonna overwhelm you with. And Mark Bailey did such a good job writing it. He made geology really available to anybody, and I really value that chapter in many ways. This really sets the foundation for everything, including plants, but also animals. Everything is tied to the geology here. And what I just want to show with this map is that you can see this kind of arcing going on. And these are terrain belts that are kind of, it's a collection of belts. This is actually really simplified, but you kind of see these arcs going on the western edge of the continent that make up this form, the Klamath Range here. But also you can see these plutons here in batholiths in the pink. Those are actually igneous rocks that have come up through other rock. There's three types of rock that make up the Klamath. It's metamorphic rock, sedimentary, and igneous. And these igneous comes deep from under the earth and intrudes the parent material, which is largely metamorphic rock, which is grinded up rock from all over the ocean, and brought together onto the continent. And that heat creates a metamorphosed geology. And the Klamath Mountains are full of that. And it's also intruded with these plutons and batholiths, which is a lot of the glaciated areas like the Trinity Alps and the Marbles, where all the granite is. So all that diversity really adds to the diversity of plants. Some soils are toxic. Michael will get all into that with plants, but this is the base of it. Digging in deeper, this is the life work of William Irwin. And he developed this geological map of the Klamath Mountains, just showing how complex it is at a deeper level. And then there's been individual maps made for smaller sections of the Klamath that are much more detailed than that map alone over on the right. So it just speaks to how complex the geology really is. I'm not going to touch too much on this, but the Klamath Mountains are really famous for how they formed. This terrain accretions was really developed. This whole idea or theory was the Klamath Mountains was a place for them to study that, geologists. And what it is basically terrains move across these oceanic crusts, and in the subduction zone below the continental plate, they go down. But sometimes those terrains get caught and get stuck on the, so like imagine you're going on a conveyor belt. And or actually more importantly, it would be a treadmill or something, and you're coming along, and then you get to the end, and your foot goes over the top because you're at the end. That's the same thing that's happening here. Rock is being peeled off, and it stacks up against, and it creates the continent. It adds to the continent, and you're actually building the continent out. And that's what the Klamath Mountains are: the series of these at least 10 terrains. And these were largely developed in the period of about 250 million years ago. But that's generally how it happens. You also got heat, and the metamorphosing happens here. And that gets pulled up when you have faulting and mountain building. Here's a larger view. You can see the Klamath Mountains is quite small in this picture, but what it really shows, this is the Western Cordillera. And it's basically a group of mountain ranges and collections of these terrain belts. And what I really want you to just see here is that the Klamath Mountains are similar in age and structure as the Sierras in some ways, but also up here in Northern Oregon, an area of the Blue Mountains as well. So there is some relationships with plants between those areas, and it may have to do with some of this super old geological processes. That dotted line there represents the shoreline of North America about 150 million years ago. So you can see a lot has happened since then, and Oregon is now not underwater in southern Washington. But when all that happened, all those trains stacked together, from what I can understand, at least superficially, is the Klamaths were apparently a really flat coastal plain, and they didn't really rise until very recently, actually about 6 million years ago is the current thought, that the Klamath Mountains actually rose up. So they're rising tremendously fast. And this picture I took a few weeks ago up on Thompson Peak, you can see, I can look west and see 10 ridge lines in this picture. It just shows the vertical relief of this mountain range. Not only is the geology complex, but the vertical relief is complex. And then thinking about aspect and all those slopes and how plants are, find a living in those places is just, there's a lot of reason why we have plant diversity. Climate regimes. This chapter is fascinating to me as well, because it not only focuses on the present, but it also digs back into the paleoclimate. But basically the climate in the Klamath Mountains is Mediterranean-like, with cool, wet winters and warm, dry summers in general. But it varies across the landscape. We happen to be next to the Pacific Ocean here, so we have more of a coastal rainforest belt, which is quite wet. This is, up here, it averages around 100 inches of rain a year. In fact, the continental record is in the South Fork Smith River. 81, 82, it was 254.9 inches for the continent. So there's a whole sidebar on that. It's a great story. It's in the climate chapter. Definitely read it. But you can see it also, we have drier zones in the Klamath. Up there in the northeast portion, it's more of a Great Basin, arid, dry, high deserty kind of feel. And then down in Redding, you have this weird anomaly of a lot of rain over there. I grew up in Lewiston, always drove through Whiskeytown, and it rained like crazy. And that place is a rain machine. Nothing like up in Crescent City, but it still is. The last point I want to make about this is you can see the contour lines that are drawn in this map are above 5,000 feet. So not only do you have variable precipitation on the landscape, you also have variable forms. So above that, it's all snowpack in the winter, and below that is rain. So those, the climate is dynamic both from a, north, south, east, west, but also an elevational perspective. And Michael took this great picture in the Siskiyous showing these orographic effects from the ocean coming into the edge of this mountain with the marine layer, but then the other side is kind of holding it back. And you can see some nice Camelopsius plants growing there, a rare endemic. The climate chapter dives into some Paleo Reconstruction stuff, which is really, it's basically forensics of the past, where they've done lake coring across the Klamath Mountains, and they take out these giant sediment cores, and you can carbon date the organic material in there to get timestamps, and then within the matrix you can key out the pollen grains to figure out what species are present and when. So you can go pretty far back. These cores go back about 15,000 years, and Michael took those data from these papers and made a great graphic of that history of climate and what that might look like in the Klamath Mountains. And you can see it goes back to the end of the Pleistocene, where we had lots of glaciation, although the Klamaths were never covered with ice completely. That's an important thing for a lot of the super ancient plants that still exist here and nowhere else, but also for the evolution of new plants. But in general, we had cooling and warming over time, and you can see that the plant life responded to that, but it also responded differently on mafic versus ultramafic soils. So different soil types, things are going to respond differently along with the climate change. The other thing that they can track in these lake cores is on the very right. You can't see it, but on the very right panel is fire return interval. And that's like how much, where's the charcoal in the sediment layer? And they were able to piece together, how does climate influence fire return intervals through time as well? But we're at the very top here. We've gone into the red because we're in the Holocene, and climate change is definitely influencing our climate through, well, we are influencing our climate. And it's changing quite rapidly. But there's all kinds, the Klamath Mountains, given their relief, their proximity to the ocean, and a bunch of other attributes, there's lots of niches for things to live in. Cold niches, warm niches, south facing, east facing, west facing. But I as a citizen science, I've been studying these glaciers for the last 13 years. They're the two remaining glaciers from the Little Ice Age that have continued to persist, at least until now. And these are about 1,700 feet lower than any other glaciers in California. And also it's the westernmost ice south of the Olympic Peninsula. What these glaciers represent they're a complete reflection of climate. They're the result of climate. And even though they're very tiny, it shows that the Klamath Mountains have these super cold niches at low elevations, relatively speaking. And they've been able to persist all this time, but until recently. So this glacier, Salmon Glacier, melted off in 2015, and Grizzly Glacier is now melted away as of last week when I was up there. It's gone. So these were hanging on the edge, but those niches are still there. And the thing I want to say is that the Klamath Mountains they have a lot of buffering capacity and to hold a lot of relic things that still exist today. Like some of these species that were just found on these glaciers, these cold-loving insects. One is a beetle, the other is a Grillodata ice crawler. Here's a picture of one. These animals are found nowhere else in the world except for on those glaciers, or at least on the Grizzly Glacier. So it's interesting how they're going to adapt. Are they going to adapt? We don't know, but there's lots of neat tidbits in the book about these creatures and how, throughout the book, there's lots of stories about very, very unique things related to the Klamath Mountains. Water, this is something that I work in constantly in my job. The Klamath Mountains, the rivers within this range are among the most special in the United States, maybe in the world. I mean, we have a great assemblage of rivers. From north to south, we have the Rogue, the Czecho, the Smith. Then it goes into the Klamath, the mighty Klamath, the third largest river in the West. And then we get into a small portion of the Sacramento watershed, mainly which drains the Pitt River. But the three of these rivers cross through, they start in the Cascades and they flow through into the Klamath. So they create a lot of connections for wildlife, and especially fish and invertebrates that are shared, and increases that diversity. But there's also tons of other aquatic habitats. Mountain lakes created by Pleistocene glaciers. We have hundreds of them in the Klamath Mountains. We have lots of ponds and peatland fens that really create a lot of plant biodiversity. And then the river corridors themselves create a lot of biodiversity along their flanks, especially for plants that like mesic zones. Peatlands are really something that I really celebrate because the Klamaths are full of peatlands. And these are basically created by biotic roles, right? This plant up here, I don't even know what species it is. Somebody in here does. It's sedge. I think of it as a keystone species because the frogs that I study in the Trinity Alps for the last 20 years, I look at their habitat. They're using these ponds to breed in, but they're created by plant decay. As plants decay, it creates this peat because it's an anaerobic environment that has perennial water feeding it all the time. And it builds up these habitats and it creates these ponds that wildlife use, frogs, bats, you name it. So I think of it as a keystone species, and we always tend to think it's abiotic things that create wetlands, but actually it's a plant here, or lots of plants, but this one is by far the most common. I can't not mention animals. 40% of this book is on animals, at least each count. And there's lots to celebrate. Amphibians are they're among the most diverse assemblage of animals we have, at least in the Klamath Mountains. We have 26 species, which is more than any other mountain range west of southern Appalachia. And we have a lot of endemic species. You can see 7 salamanders here. These are all from the family Plethodonidae, terrestrial lungless salamanders. And yeah, 7 endemic species. And you know, they're not just there's 26 total, but you can see there's a heat map of where species are, and a lot of them are on that east or that west side where it's wet, right? Western coastal. But you can see a lot of the endemic species are in these drier areas or areas that are maybe unique geologically. So, you know, water doesn't always tell the story. Sometimes it's geology. Sometimes it's you know, the water itself, where is the water, but also, you know, just where things ended up and where things got stranded, because amphibians are limited in their dispersal, especially crossing big rivers or super high ridges. Fire is a major ecological process and cultural process in the Klamath Mountains. Jeffrey Kane is an expert in fire. He wrote the chapter. It's fascinating what Jeff goes through, both with modern fire, but also digging back into historic fire, paleo fire. But wood fire is a major natural disturbance regime that drives plant communities and plant succession and animal communities. It drives a lot of stuff. It's great to connect it to all these other things I've been explaining, because this all builds upon understanding a natural history. This is a great figure that Michael has made in the past it's basically a cross section from Crescent City to Redding, showing the fire frequency across the landscape, both, you know, along this western mesic coastal forest all the way into Redding, where it's really hot and arid. But also you can see there's variation in that firescape from an elevational perspective. As you move up in elevation, fire's frequency is less common. This creates a lot of mosaics on the landscape, just thinking about those different dimensions. But yeah, digging, there's stuff in the book on paleo fire reconstruction, similar to the pollen I was talking about. You can look at charcoal through time and go and look at fire histories. And in general, just to summarize some of it, the historic fire return interval before 1900 was around 15 years, with some variation, but on average. But fire was more frequent up north in the Rogue River Basin at about 8 years. And it was also more frequent on south and west aspects. That's pretty understandable. It's drier and warmer. And then it's less frequent on the western boundary, where, again, it's more influenced by the coast. But then there's indigenous fire that we're just really starting to learn a lot more about. You know, fire has a couple different ignitions. One is, you know, lightning. The other is this native peoples. And this is an example of 6 different plots in the eastern edge of the range that show individual trees and their fire scars and their rings from coring trees. And you can see it was quite common before around 1900, a little after, 1875. And this is when colonizers came in and the gold rush happened, and the world was turned upside down for native peoples. A lot of them died, a lot of them got displaced. Their culture was kind of really relegated to much, smaller influence on the landscape because of that basically invasion on their part. But there's basically, my point with this is that after that return interval was stopped pretty much for the most part because of fire suppression. And so here we are and there's a lot of promise now in the future with bringing back these tribal practices to get fire on the landscape, because we know it's a natural thing, we know it's important, and we know our forests need it. So the book covers a lot of those aspects. And just to end on a little more on First Peoples, there's in the First Peoples chapter, it mentions there's 15 different tribes in the area and also 10 different languages. Think of that cultural diversity that is developed here across this relatively small area, I'm considering with 15 different tribes. But the point is that we have a lot to learn from Native peoples, and they have had a profound influence on the landscape, which shows by this mosaic of vegetation types. They definitely have influenced the vegetation on the landscape in many ways. And yeah, people are starting to listen, and it's important. So I'm going to leave it at that. So Michael can go into his spiel about vegetation. Sorry about the mix-ups on the technology, but yeah.
Yeah. All right, can this thing be hidden? God. I used to know Zoom, but I've forgotten it.
Not to stop
Hide
share.
video, is that it? I'm gonna mess it up. I'm just gonna go. I don't want to mess it up anymore. All right, cool. Thanks, Justin. Do we want to? Now the slides aren't advancing again. Let's see. All right, there we go. Okay, can we kill those lights, Larry? Do you mind doing that? So, a quick story. I moved to Northwest California in 2002 to get my teaching credential, and I was here about 3 weeks, and I needed to get into the mountains. So mid-February, I drove up to what's the Devil's Punch Bowl Trail XS, 4,000-foot pass. And I was like, oh, I can easily get back in there, no problem. Well, I was in waist deep snow within a couple of miles, hiked through that, dropped down into Clear Creek, saw my first Darlingtonia, and my mind was blown by these plant communities. I had been all over the Sierra, I've been all over Southern California, the Coast Range. I'd been into Canyon Creek once in the late 90s in the Trinity Alps. And I fell in love very quickly with the Klamath Mountains because of these complex communities. I brought in 4 other co-authors. Julie Evans is the vegetation guru in California. Julie Kierstead is a former botanist on the Shasta Trinity. Michael Murray did his thesis with John Sawyer on Mountain Meadows. I needed that expertise to really tell this whole story, so they helped me out a lot in this chapter, and I want to thank them. Quickly on vegetation patterns. These are just assemblages of plants, right? I'm not going to go into huge detail, but they reproduce themselves in many ways. They associate, similar plants are associating with each other across the landscape. Justin showed you how these patterns change over time. They don't change as much on serpentine, is what we've learned from some of the sediment core studies, but on some of the different more fertile soils, they did change a lot, and they have been changing. These alliances are things that basically species associate with each other. This is all due to climate and substrate and hydrology and moisture and nutrients. So all these come together and they influence the plants that are hanging out with each other, along with disturbance, of course. And in California, there's a whole bunch of vegetation alliances. This is just from the CNPS vegetation website. You can search all the different environments that they break California up into. So basically, they've defined 461 across the state. If we filter that down into Northwest California, there's about 261. And that's all on the CNPS vegetation at cnps.org. Within the Klamath Mountains in particular, they're looking at about 136 of these alliances. So I distilled it Well, this is one, I was actually talking with Dana York this weekend. This is one that we both love and it's near and dear to our heart, this Abies Amabilis Association. And it's just amazing. You go, there's 2 places in California they grow. And if I was just dropped into one of them without being able to see the mountains around it, I wouldn't know which one I was in because it's the same, those same patterns. It's often Pacific, or it's always Pacific silver fir, mountain hemlock, and then very little in the understory. There's a rubus and a few other things, but it's just amazing to see that these patterns and find them in different places across the range. And that's what I really fell in love with. So how am I going to tell the story of alliances? Well, I distilled it into 10 plant communities. So the first one, I'm going to start in the west and I'm going to kind of move across the range. The first one is the coastal lowland forest. And this is that forest that I first saw when I went into the Siskiyous. I brought my son into this forest this last week to do some trail work on the old Kelsey Trail. But they're typically big trees, big flowing rivers like the Smith or the Chetco or the mouth of the Rogue. And there's often 2 tiers to the canopy with like a tan oak understory where the Douglas firs kind of emerge above those. And there are some serpentine outcrops within the Josephine ophiolite. So you'll find some interesting manzanitas out there as well. So this is the Czecho River. The pattern here is the disturbance is frequent. So there's alders along the riverbanks. And then up above those will be oaks and some other mixed evergreen forests. There's also these hemlock forests that look like redwood forests with the understory of sword fern. A lot of the same species, almost the exact same species we see in the redwood forest, just without redwoods as you move north into coastal Oregon and the edge of the Klamath. This is on Blue Creek in the one of the most spectacular coastal lowland forests left in California. Port Orford cedar, Douglas fir, obviously big leaf maple here changing color. Anyone ever been down into Blue Creek from the upper end of the you get there actually through Orleans and you drop in, but you kind of go over the crest of the Siskiyous and then you're basically in facing the ocean again. But that's the easiest way to get there. The mouth of Blue Creek is sacred Yurok territory, and thankfully they were just able to purchase it recently. So it's back in their hands. Some highlights. What I'm going to do here is highlight with Cal Flora maps. You can see where the distribution of the Kellogg's lily is. Dave Emper says he's our lily expert, but basically the Kellogg's lily's origin may be off the Klamath and in sort of the freshwater Kneeland area, but they definitely creep up into the Klamath Mountains in northern Humboldt and Del Norte County. Love that lily every July. The mahogany fawn lily, another special one that we can find in the Coast Range here, but also creeps into the Klamath, particularly in the same areas I just mentioned. This is an Oregon specialist, the Oregon bleeding heart, Dicentra formosa oregana. Pretty little thing that I found in the Kalmiopsis wilderness. I can't mention this forest without mentioning the Port Orford cedar. Of course, the southern range extension is on Horse Mountain, and they trickle on up through the Siskiyous and become a little bit more common as it gets a little wetter and more fertile up into Oregon. So the interior lowland forest. So the distinction here is that these are lower elevations and a little bit drier. So over the rain shadow of the Siskiyou Mountains, and these are the river valleys from say 700 or 800 feet, maybe creeping up to 2,000 feet as you head east across the range. And here's some highlights from these areas. Of course, Garimera is one that everyone loves to hide under in the summer when they're swimming in swimming holes, and there's a primula and modesty, and I guess that's a redbud. So just some highlights of these forests. Going into a little bit more details of these patterns. Oops, sorry about that. Didn't mean to do that so fast. This is a gray pine, black oak, and lots of poison oak. This is near Big Flat, the Straw Bale House. You can get up into Manzanita Campground and hike up Manzanita Ridge. I hiked up here with John Sawyer once, and it was very delightful. It's a nice little winter walk. Also along the river, this is along the Trinity River, obviously lots of big leaf maples here, disturbance though along these rivers, right? So these aren't often very old trees. They'll get washed out with flooding events, and then the deciduous trees or the flowering trees, competing against conifers return a lot faster. So that's why you'll find them at river's edge. I had notes on this. I can't remember what they are. They're hidden because of the screen sharing capabilities. Oh, I know. This is near Witchbeck. Not Witchbeck, Soamesbar. And this is the kind of this getting into the little bit higher elevation lowland forest. It gets into the ponderosa pine, Douglas fir, and sugar pine in areas like this as you move upriver. And I love this picture, and I have not actually been into this area of the Klamath Mountains, I'm ashamed to say. This is a picture from Julie Kierstead, but this is the limestones over by Shasta Lake. These are the areas that Dana York, again, I'll mention him, has been going into and discovering, describing new species. And gray pine, Quercus callagii, the black oak. And this is also the area that you can see, or you find the caves, the exceptional caves of the Klamath. There's an endemic scorpion in one of those caves. We have a sidebar about that in the invertebrate chapter, but just fascinating stuff. And also this salamander hotspot over there as well, and snails, on and on. Some highlights of the interior lowland forest. Here's the Shasta snow wreath. Of course, this was a member of the rose family. It's like a living fossil discovered in the early 90s. It was only known from the fossil record before it was described. Here's the Darnera again. It's a neat plant, just from the the northern Sierra up into the Klamath, a little bit into Oregon. Here's the Modesty. It's one that I always have enjoyed finding, early bloomer. Of course, Douglas fir. You can't go anywhere in the Klamath Mountains without finding a Douglas fir, it seems like. I mean, they're from the coastal dunes all the way to some of the highest summits. You can see Douglas fir. They grew up to about 8,000 feet across the. All right, oak woodlands. What an exceptional diversity of oaks we have in the Klamath as well. And this pattern that we see here, we talked about the influence of the first peoples. This pattern is most likely due to the influence of the first people distributing these species, tending these species, and cultivating these species for millennia. And here's an example of some of these oak woodland vegetation patterns. And we'll look a little bit more detail at some of these as we go forward. So on the river benches, this is a river bench along the Trinity River near Grays Falls. But this river bench, this was a Native American site, right? These trees were tended. Other species around these trees were tended, and they were harvested and used as a food source, among other things. This is near Whiskey Town. This whole hillside is burned. I need to retake this picture after the car fire, but this is all blue oaks. So we're kind of at the northern, this area here is at the north western range extension for blue oak in California. This is a interesting pattern where you have canyon live oak. This is also very close to that same spot. Canyon live oak with black oak and these emerging Douglas firs, and then emerging.
What are you doing?
I want to say those are knobcone pine near the top, but they might be gray pine. We're having a presentation. Thank you. Mute yourselves, please. This is a pattern of on the Trinity River where the canyon live oaks sit. River's edge. This is a north-facing slope, and canyon live oaks are one of my favorites of the oaks. They just have that beautiful shape to them, and they tend to be in these places that I like to be as well. And I'm going to show you one of the most spectacular canyon oaks that I have ever seen in my life. This is actually in Lowland, but I couldn't pass it up because my son's here tonight too, and here he is at about age 6, I guess, right, Silas? We got to go back to that tree, buddy. It's on private property. We gotta figure out how to make that more accessible. All right, Chaparral, another cool story. we're at the Klamath Mountains are like range limits, right? We're at the northern range limit of Chaparral within just north of, you can see the edge of the boundary of the Klamath Mountain geomorphic province. That's where Chaparral trickles out. And of course, Chaparral is characterized by plants that have sclerophyllous leaves, so they're real thick leaves, often flammable, and they want that fire to return for stand replacing regeneration. Plants like, obviously, one of my favorites, manzanitas, but chamise, on and on and on. These plants like to burn, and then they like to regrow fast. There are a couple of conifers too that hang out in the Chaparral. So here's a pattern of, this is that same mountain that I talked about. Here's that blue oak stand again. Here's some ceanothus. Here's the chamise. It's interesting to see these pockets of the blue oak within the Chaparral, though. Here's some Montane Chaparral. This is in the Siskiyou Wilderness. So these are a lot of rare manzanitas, Arctostaphylos suspidula and Arctostaphylos nortensis, along with sugar pines emerging. You can see fire was frequent, at least on these upper slopes, maybe less frequent in the lower slopes. Fascinating to see that. A little plug for my manzanita book. Here's the Mallory's. So Mallory's is only over in the Whiskeytown area. I've never seen that one. I guess you can drive up Iron Mountain Road to see it. And then Arctostaphylos clamathensis is kind of hidden up in the Scott Mountains along this Scott Trinity Divide. And then here's the two I just mentioned, Arctostaphylos hispidula, and here's nortensis, and here's hispidula. These are specialists on the Josephine ophiolite, Del Norte and Southwest Oregon, Josephine County. More chaparral patterns. So this is that typical Montane chaparral. Somebody mentioned Huckleberry Oak. That's definitely in this picture. Arctostaphylos patula, Arctostaphylos navidensis. Sometimes you get a few other species that sneak in, and you can see a little bit of conifer encroachment in here as well, probably due to lack of fire over the last 100 years. Here's another view of the Montane chaparral. This time it has knobcone and pine in it. And there is in here, this is the Chrysolepis sempervirens, the common name, somebody help me. Thank you, bush chinkapin. All right, here's that arcing pattern that Justin talked about in the serpentines on the accretionary events, but this is really sort of the holy grail of plant diversity within the Klamath Mountains. These are the largest serpentine outcrops in North America, and these are older outcrops. This is the Mount Eddy, Scott Mountain area. And for those viewing at home, I'm just highlighting the stuff to the east. And then up here, these are the newer serpentines. And here are some of the serpentine patterns that just really are fascinating and lovely to walk through, and botanically so interesting. This is a picture that John Sawyer took that I just love. This is up on High Divide in Del Norte County. These windswept Jeffrey pines just characterize this newer serpentine. This is, of course, an understory. This is Arctostaphylos navidensis, subspecies Knightii. It's a burrow-forming manzanita that only lives on these outcrops, and probably some patula or something else popping up back here in the background. This is in the Kalmiopsis wilderness. This is near Vulcan Lake, but here, this is a higher elevation serpentine. You've got western white pine, Port Orford cedar, the Darlingtonia are just all over the whole rim of the lake, and probably some sugar pine. Sugar pine do pretty well on serpentine as well. And this is one of the lowest elevations, these peaks around Vulcan Peak, I guess, some of the lowest elevations you can find western white pine in the Klamath Mountains. It's down around like 4,000 feet, which is kind of exceptional. This is on Preston Peak, and these serpentines, I mean, it's just so fascinating to see. Nothing's growing in here. This stuff is so mineral rich, but you've got, I don't know what buckwheat it is, but some beautiful buckwheats popping up, incense cedar, western white pine, and definitely some Port Orford cedar and brewer spruce on the fringes where the serpentines are a little bit more nutrient rich. And the older serpentines. So here's Mount Shasta in the distance here. And this is the Boulder Lakes Basin. Fantastic foxtail pine grove right here, one of the premier in the whole Klamath Mountains. And these older serpentines have allowed some nutrient deposition for richer soils, but then some of these north-facing slopes are still very depauperate of much plant life. The Pacific Crest Trail, if you've ever hiked parts of that, flows through here, and Camp Unalahi is up in this area. And just a glory shot. This is in the Marble Mountains. This is Boulder Peak. It's my buddy Ian. I was doing some white bark pine surveys, and that's about 5 white bark pines right there that I found. Not on the serpentine, just on the edge of the serpentine, but white bark pine at higher elevations can deal with a little bit of serpentine as well. This is a Jeffrey pine. And the glory of the carnivorous plants. This is some of these fins. Maybe this is my favorite fin in the world. I'm not going to tell you where it is, but spectacular spot. Massive Darlingtonia. There's even some bog asphodel in here. Probably not any, I think it's just 2 carnivorous plants in this fin, but just to highlight a few of the carnivorous plants. This is the one of the largest meadows of Darlingtonia I've ever seen. This is in the Scott Mountains. This is Mount Eddy. Maybe Mount Eddy's right over here to the right. That might be China Mountain. But I drove right to this stand. This is on the road over to like Gazelle from the North Fork of the Trinity River. Another glory shot of some high elevation Darlingtonia in the Trinity Alps. After the snow is melted, it's just resuscitating itself. Here's Pinguicula, kind of a specialist, mostly in Delaware County, but there's reports of it in the Sacramento River Basin and probably a few other places across the Klamath. But this one likes to curl up, trap. It's got these little glands on the leaves, and it draws in these little insects that think they're going to get a little drink, and they get stuck and then swallowed up. Here's the sundew. We have 2 sundews in the Klamath Mountains. We also have Drosera anglica, which is pretty rare. I think it's only in 1 spot. Drosera rotundifolia is a little bit more common. And these are, of course, these are all on these fins where the nutrients are poor, so the plants are supplementing their lifestyle with some insects. Other serpentine plants, this is one of our famous lilies from basically a couple locations in Humboldt, but mostly Del Norte and Josephine counties in Oregon. Bollander's lily. Waldo's rock cress. I can't leave Oregon out of the rare plant world. I think you can see this one at $8 Mountain if you drive through in the spring. And here is one of my favorites, Siskiyou Lewissia. Many people have this as a cultivated plant somewhere around your house. We do, but the deer keep eating it. But it keeps coming back. Does pretty darn well. And then Julie was very sure that I would not leave out the milkweeds in the book. So I'm going to show you the serpentine milkweed, which reaches really its northern range extension in the Trinity County ophiolites, serpentine outcrops, and of course extends down the coast range just a bit. Another one that I was not allowed to leave out, thanks to Julie. She loves her sedums. This is the T-Doc stone crop, and I guess I don't have a range map for that. I don't think it has a range map yet. Oh yeah, there it says it doesn't have a rank. It doesn't really have a range map because it's just newly described. So that's pretty exciting. And then this was the first serpentine plant that I really fell in love with, climbing Preston Peak in late May. A friend of mine noticed it. I probably would have just stepped on it, but he said, look at this little lily. And the Siskiyou fritillary, it does extend further south, I think all the way down to like close to Snow Mountain, but then also north up into Oregon. But it's got a real common, I think it's quite common in the Siskiyous. Almost any of these serpentine outcrops up in the Siskiyous, you can see it in late May or early June. This picture I took up on Sawtooth Peak in the Siskiyous. And what a special plant this is. This was one of my, probably the best thing I've ever written, maybe. Was about this plant in 2010. I went and visited it in the Kalamiopsis, and I wrote this blog post, and my wife Allison helped me a lot with it. But it just really, it's just an exceptional story because this is an ancient ericaceous plant. I love the Ericaceae. They're often with conifers, you know, they do well on poor soils like conifers, but this one only lives, these are now a different species. But this Kalamiopsis leachiana only lives within the boundaries of this wilderness we call the Kalamiopsis now. And it's like this spectacular little azalea that blooms, you know, early summer. And you got to hike to get to it. Pretty. And here it is post biscuit fire. I took these pictures in 2008, I believe, and the biscuit fire was 2002. And you can see just how that rejuvenating fire, it just flourished. It was flourishing, absolutely spectacular. All right, the Montane Conifers. So we're going to end with the Montane Conifers and the Sky Islands, and then a little bit of the very eastern Juniper Woodlands. But the Montane Conifers, like these are the places I love to be. I love to be hiking on a trail and transition into that snow forest and have the firs, particularly the red firs, the Shasta red firs, start to show up and become a part of that landscape. And here's John Sawyer, who taught me about the enriched conifer forests of the Russian wilderness. And we were hiking here in the Sugar Creek. All right, so I just learned that this Douglas fir forest no longer exists. It burned in the Siskiyou Wilderness, but it's kind of this classic transition where the lichens start to drape on the tree bark, and we're getting into the white fir Douglas fir forest, which is the most common vegetation alliance in the Klamath Mountains. Here is the red fir, Shasta red fir forest. So this is Abies magnifica, variety shastensis. It's really just a hybrid between Abies magnifica and Abies procera. Those genetics are, you know, kind of slowly being worked out. But the classic red fir forest of the high elevations is in the Marble Mountains. And then the high elevation pine forest. This is in the eastern Klamath. So this is near China Mountain. This is actually in the Corey Peak Botanical Area. I highly recommend. But this is visiting this area. The Gazelle Callahan Road is out here, and you can kind of drive up Kangaroo Lakes just over the ridge. But these beautiful big valleys, just filled with western white pine, lodgepole pine, vast stands of these trees. The pines love the eastern Klamath. Because it's serpentine, they often will outcompete, or the firs typically don't compete well, I should say, and the pines are able to dominate these older serpentines of the eastern Klamath. Here's the heart of the Miracle Mile. This is Russian Peak right here, kind of a classic picture of all this amazing conifer diversity. And of course, the Miracle Mile is known as the most species rich square mile of conifers in any temperate region. 18 species within this Miracle Mile. And just to pay homage to the two that really define this, Dale Thornburg and John Sawyer heard about this area from plant ecologists like Ledyard Stebbins in the Bay Area, and they said they had just been hired at Humboldt State, and they said go check out, or Stebbins told Sawyer, go check this place out. I've heard that there are Engelmann spruce up there. So the story that John told me is they walked up Sugar Creek, they couldn't help themselves, they climbed up this steep ridgeline, which I did, looking for the common juniper. I missed them. I walked up here, needed to walk right here. Anyway, walked up this gnarly chaparral laden, it's all Arctosavis patula, rips your shins up. But they may have popped over here because they dropped into Big or Little Duck Lake, and they dropped their packs right here at this number 2. And that's where they discovered Abies lasiocarpa subalpine fir for the first time in California. And that's how the Miracle Mile was born, because they also passed on the summit, or on the edge of the summit, are whitebark pine and foxtail pine, which aren't very common in the Russian wilderness. So within this square mile, here are all the conifers, the 18 conifer species that can be found. Pretty spectacular. All right, heterotrophic plants love this montane conifer forest. These are plants that basically rely on other plants for their nutrients. They might have an association with a fungus, or they might just directly tap a root of another plant. That's some of the highlights of the Klamath. And it also appears from what the research that I've done, that the Klamath may be the biodiversity hotspot for Western forests as far as the heterotrophic plants, which kind of makes sense because we have so much diversity as it is, but really compelling species, often with these cool red colors, and of course no leaves because they're not photosynthesizing. Pacific silver fir, I mentioned these stands earlier. I got to map these stands for the Klamath National Forest a couple of years ago, just basically in the Marble Mountains around Hancock Lake, and then on the Siskiyou Crest along the Pacific Crest Trail near Cook and Green Pass. And I mentioned that if you were dropped into one of these stands, or if I was dropped into one of these stands, I wouldn't know which one was which because they look so similar. And this is what I mentioned is it's basically silver fir and hemlock and hardly any understory. It's really just a remarkable pattern that is found in 2 places in California. And I make the argument that the Pacific silver fir is California's rarest conifer. It's a cascade specialist, as you saw in that previous range map. And here's some of the mapping that I did just to kind of show you the patterns of Pacific silver fir and mountain hemlock across the region. So here's English Lake, Hancock Lake, and these are the pockets. And I was up here with Justin. Justin helped me to do some of this as well. 2 of these pockets have burned in the last few years, stand replacing events, but still these north-facing slopes will hopefully continue to remain cool, wet, and fire-free for the persistence of this unique vegetation alliance. And here's the stands on Cook and Green Pass. So here's Applegate Reservoir. Here's the Oregon border. And here's the Cook and Green Pass right here, this white botanical area. And here's the Pacific Crest Trail. And so the, oh gosh, I forget the name of the fire, about 2016, wiped out the top part of this stand, but we still have this pocket of Pacific silver fir. And this is White Mountain and Black Mountain. So if you're ever on the PCT, you drop in between White Mountain and Black Mountain, and you can get into that unique stand of Pacific silver fir up there. Pretty cool place to visit. I'm not going to worry about that slide, but there are a few damagers that are affecting Pacific silver fir bears. This fir engraver beetle, which is also hitting the Shasta fir pretty hard, that causes this branch dieback, and also the whole tree mortality. More often than not right now, we're just seeing a lot of this branch dieback from the engraver beetles feeding on those branches. And then we're still not really sure some of the other pests, but basically there's 3 things that could be there, including the balsam woolly adelgid, which has just recently been found in California. This is an invasive, the one that's affecting the balsam firs on the East Coast and the Appalachians. And here's that stand replacing fire. Here's Justin here in the picture. This is was a pure Pacific silver fir stand near Tom's Lake in the Marbles. All right, Meadowlands. Want to mention these real quick. Silas, does this place look familiar? I had Silas stand next to that rock this summer. I took this picture in our last wet year, which was 2011, when I was hiking through on the Bigfoot Trail. This was around July 3rd or 4th. So if you've ever been to Frying Pan Lakes, that area here, this is above Marble Valley or adjacent to Marble Valley. Beautiful meadowlands in the northern marbles. So Justin mentioned the importance of the peatlands that we created. He was inspired. Oh man, I got the old book cover on there, Justin. Forgot about that. I was just fascinated. He's like, check out this paper from the Sierra Nevada and how these fens or these peatlands are formed. And it was really fascinating to see the different dynamics based on geology, based on slope. You know, basically these 4 different fen types can form because of all those factors. So that was kind of cool to dig into. We've got that in the book. Other Meadowlands patterns. Oh, shucks. Again, I don't have my notes. I forget exactly what I was going to talk about in this one. Oh, criminy. Zoom foiled me, but it's a pretty meadow, right? And of course, this is a lake in the Red Butte. So this is in Oregon. It's called the Frog Pond, as you might imagine why. But this is Nufar, what's the common name of Nufar? I need some help. Pond lily, there you
Pond
go.
lily.
Thank you. And what was fascinating here is I watched an aquatic garter snake sort of move around on all these pads looking for its next meal. So the plants are providing some hunting grounds for some of the cool reptiles that live up there. And this is, I got to spend the night next to this meadow in the Siskiyou Wilderness when I was mapping Alaska yellow cedar, Calotropsis nucitensis. This is all Calotropsis in this picture, along with, brewer spruce. There was something like 11 or 12 conifer species around this little peatland. But look at how small this relic. This was my water source for the weekend. It was the only water around. There was no flowing water. This was late, early October, I think. But how fascinating. But the Narthecium was actually still blooming when I was there. And just so cool to see how these plants, like the carex, are forming these peatlands and holding that water through the season. And Justin showed this slide earlier, but here's a zoom in of that carex that's building this peatland in the Trinity Alps. And another famous peatland fen in the Trinity Alps as well, with Darlingtonia rimming it. All right, let's see if I can get this video to work. This is a fascinating peatland here. So we only did it once, but it was too much fun not to. So basically it's this accumulated peat, and I thought this was sphagnum, but Dana, you corrected me, thankfully. It's an unusual moss that basically acts the same as sphagnum does further north. But this is this was formed, of course, by that sphagnum and other carex that builds that. Whoops, it's just going to keep showing my friend Jay dancing here. All right, there we go. Now, one problem is, of course, the disappearing meadowlands. So these are pictures from the 40s. These are pictures from 2015. And this is Sky High Lakes and an adjacent lake. But why are these disappearing? Well, it's a combination of factors. Grazing is playing a large role here because the animals are not eating the conifers. The conifers are able to grow because of that. Fire has also been reduced on this landscape, and that's not eliminating the conifers. So this encroachment is disturbing, but it's something that the conversations are starting to potentially be. Maybe there's some mechanical removal of some of these conifers to help restore these meadowlands. Oh, this is Frying Pan. Yeah, Sky High, right? Frying Pan Lake. So anyway, conversation needs to happen around some meadow restoration in the marbles in particular. All right, the Sky Islands. These are the highest summits of the range and where my favorite conifer lives. This is Preston Peak. There's only one Sky Island in the Siskiyous, and I consider this to be it. These are relic stands of Alaska yellow cedar, Calotropsis nucitensis, and Abies procera, the noble fir. The only place that I'm really convinced in California you can find noble firs on these summits of the highest summits of the Siskiyous. This is Box Camp Mountain. Silas and I went up here this summer as well, looking over towards Boulder Peak. White bark pine, foxtail pine, beautiful stands near the summit of Board Camp or Box Camp. And excuse me, Box Camp is unusual because it's only about 6,600 feet. So it's one of the lowest elevation Sky Islands. And these trees aren't going to have any ability to move upward. So it's kind of an interesting test as we watch climate change. This is on China Mountain, and what's fascinating here, I showed this picture to the bunch of white bark pine nuts, and they didn't believe me that white bark pine and foxtail pine were all on the south facing slopes. because that just doesn't happen in the Rocky Mountains. The white barks are kind of all over, but they're getting out competed here by the firs and the hemlocks on the north slope. So this really, again, just kind of typifies the uniqueness of the Klamath Mountains in its ability to plants to just sort themselves out and compete with each other in very small spaces. This is up on Mount Eddy, the highest peak in the Klamath Mountains. These are all white bark pine. There's like one weird pocket of foxtails right here, but it's basically all white bark across this landscape. Crumholtz to taller ones. And then the extreme Trinity Alps, this south-facing slope is foxtail pine and white bark pine only, exclusively. This is gabbro. You can kind of see that hint of the green of the serpentines. A couple other beautiful plants, the mountain bog gentian, Mount Eddy sky pilot. Thanks to Kirsten Wayman for that picture. I've still never seen that one in its full glory. Look at that range right there. Bam, one spot, Mount Eddy. And this was, remember this one, Silas? We saw this all over the marbles this summer. It was spectacular. It was like yellow, 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 yellow. I should have switched out for one of my pictures, but Kirsten, it's a beautiful picture by Kirsten. And Dana, I'm bringing him up for the fourth time. Dana found a new drama this summer in the marbles, and it looks just like this, but it has white flowers, and it only grows on 2 peaks and that he found it on in the southern marbles. So we're going to have a new drama emerge in the next couple of years. And then I'm going to end the subalpine skylines with Sawyer's pussy toes. This is a relatively newly described species, and it was named for John Sawyer. And there's John. John, thanks for the inspiration. This is on our trip up Limestone Ridge in the Central Trinity Alps in about 2008, I guess. And I got to show the foxtail pine because it was his favorite tree and it is my favorite tree. And lastly, just real quick, the Juniper Woodland. So the Great Basin influence is imminent and prominent in this edge of the Klamath. Even up on Marble Mountain, you get a lot of Great Basin species. Things like aspen are super common in that corner of the marbles because things are drying out and you've got that influence from the east. And here's just some pictures of those vegetation patterns with the ponderosa pines and the juniper. And a couple of highlights, Scott Valley Phacelia. Looks a little bit. This is the Siskiyou Mariposa lily. Wairika phlox. So these are all just unusual things that are growing in that little corner of the world that burned in this summer in the that fire the first big fire that hit. I'm blanking on the name right now. Yeah, McKinney, thank you. And this is from Callahan to Gazelle, that road, Gazelle Callahan Road. All right, so that's it. Thank you all for your interest in our projects and for being here. So, feel free to trickle out, but if anybody has any questions, Justin and I could spend a couple of more minutes doing some questions if you all would like. You're like, oh, all the answers are in the book. Yeah, Gary. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, good question. So Gary asked if people want to go, you can go, that's fine. But let's talk out there. So Gary asked, how often do you see that association with white bark pine, foxtail pine, and Clark's nutcrackers? And the answer is pretty often. The nutcrackers, in my opinion, seem to have a pretty stable and healthy relationship. Foxtail pines are fabulous because they seem to always produce cones. White barks are less so. They're more of the 6-7 year cycle, it seems. But I believe, and there's no evidence of this yet, but I believe because foxtails and white barks are sort of sympatric, that the nutcrackers do a lot better because of the foxtail pines being around. Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, thank you all for coming out. Right. I'll let you do it.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for coming. Good.
Bye, Andrew.
Hey.